The science behind kinesiology taping session 1. There are 2 sessions for the science of the kinesiology taping learning, and it's because we put it into 2 bite-sized chunks so you can follow one after the other one if you want to, but you can take a break between. What we will be covering in this online learning. We're going to start with discussing when and how kinesiology taping came into the therapy industry, the early claims of kinesiology taping, and there were a lot of companies that made some pretty big claims about kinesiology taping and its benefits and uses, which we'll be discussing. And then we're going to start to look at why we think kinesiology taping works and start to look at the science. And the first part of that in session 1 today is looking at kinesiology taping and the mechanoreceptors. So, when was it first created? So the first company created kinesiology taping in 1979, and it was a chiropractor called Kaze. And the reason he created it was he wanted to find another way to support his manual therapy treatments and his manual therapy clients. And then since then, it's been gradually growing and progressing in the industry. And it was first used in the 1988 Olympics. But if you were watching the Olympics around 2008, you would have seen that was when it was the popular technique or a treatment at that time. And everyone was wearing kinesiology taping. And since then, it's been a growing industry. And then since the 2008, there have been hundreds of companies that sell kinesiology tape online, and most physiotherapy, chiropractic, osteopath, massage therapy companies will often have kinesiology taping as one of their offerings to help support their clients. So why the controversy with kinesiology taping? And if you watch the introduction video of Penty and I, we were discussing about the claims that were made with kinesiology taping, but also how some people love kinesiology taping, so that's clients and therapists, and some people don't see the use of kinesiology taping. So we're going to discuss a little bit why that might be the case and where that's come from. So it all started with some pretty big, outrageous claims were made about kinesiology taping. And some companies use certain marketing strategies that demonstrated that kinesiology taping can help treat injuries such as strain sprains and issues and conditions such as plantar fasciitis. And based on these pretty big claims, when people weren't recovering from their injuries with just using kinesiology taping alone, this then ended up leading to some pretty big lawsuits within the US. And that was reported quite highly in the media. So it made mainstream media. So in the UK, newspapers such as the Daily Mail reported it, The Guardian did as well, because kinesiology taping was used by lots of sports people, so lots of celebrities, lots of mainstream sports people. So when these claims came out, they ran with it. And then that began the controversy or the arguments around the benefits, uses of kinesiology taping. And a lot of people sit in one or two camps. They love it or they hate it. And since then, there's been lots more research that has been conducted both for and against kinesiology taping, and it is conflicting. So there's lots of studies demonstrating the benefits of kinesiology taping in some areas and some not so much. The problem with some of the research is it's based on quite small studies. So some studies only have maybe 12 people in them. But there are a few systematic reviews coming through and in the public domain, which have a better source of information and research based on the uses of kinesiology taping. So those claims and lawsuits often happened when kinesiology taping was used on its own. So it was tape that was just applied as its individual treatment method. And unfortunately, sticking kinesiology tape on a body part will not fix an injury. However, it does have its benefits, and both Penty and I love kinesiology taping for what it does and what it does well, which you'll learn as we go and progress into the course. But it's got to be used in conjunction with a whole treatment plan. It's not just like sticking a plaster on and it's going to get better. It's in conjunction with everything else that you currently do. So whatever modality we use, and in this instance it is kinesiology taping, we bring it a part of a bigger treatment where we assess, we release, activate, and then move. And then taping forms a part of that. So you can have all of the tools in the toolbox, but if you don't know what your intention is for your patient, for that relationship with your patient, then the results that the patient is looking for will often be short-lived. So keep focusing on that whole body approach, starting with the assessment, then into the release, the activate, and then getting them moving again. That's your intention. So why do we use kinesiology taping? Why does it work? Let's start exploring some of the main reasons why therapists and clinicians use kinesiology. So there are lots of reasons why people use kinesiology taping within their practice and why clients love kinesiology taping. But we find that these are the 5 main areas that it tends to work best and where there's more science and research about this. So we're going to start with proprioceptive awareness, and we're going to cover that in session 1. And that's about the relationship between the sensory receptors and the brain and how kinesiology taping may improve that awareness by creating that new stimuli and more feedback back to the brain. Next, we'll look at decompression, and the way the tape attaches itself to the skin may create an offloading decompression of the tissues beneath the skin. Offloading, so that's offloading at joints, so offloading pressure from tendons when there is an area of restriction, inflammation, pain around joints. Next is support, so using a higher tension of kinesiology taping to create a bigger support around a joint post-sprain, post-injury. And then lastly, pain relief. And we have a separate session for this. So we're going to discuss pain relief in a separate module. And combined with the proprioceptive awareness, creating that novel stimuli, often comes pain relief. So we're going to discuss that in a separate work session. So let's begin with the proprioceptive awareness. The skin and the brain are completely connected. They formed part of the ectoderm as an embryo. And now what happens is that the skin relays information back to the brain to make a decision through the sensory system. So the skin detects subtle changes in the body that is continually fed back to the brain through those different sensory nerves. So we have different nerve endings within the tissues. So we have nociceptors, which detect sharp versus dull experiences. So they're often called the pain receptors, which we'll discuss in the pain section a little bit later. The thermoreceptors, which detect temperature changes. Mechanoreceptors, which detect texture and vibration. And then the proprioceptors, which detect stretch. So when we're discussing manual therapy, mechanoreceptors is often discussed based on the effect that some manual therapy techniques may have on these sensory nerve endings. So let's just recap on the individual mechanoreceptors. So the first ones are muscle spindles. So those are your proprioceptors found in the muscle belly. And what they do, if the muscle is stretched over a long period of time, the muscle spindles will often activate to create muscle contraction to bear that load. The next are your Golgi receptors, and those are found in the deep fascia. So your Golgi tendon organs and your Golgi end organs, which are found in the ligaments, are your Golgi receptors. And they monitor tension within the ligaments and within the tendons. Next, you have your Pacini receptors. So your Pacini are found in the more tendinous areas of the muscular tendinous junctions. And they respond to quick changes of vibration and quick changes of pressure, and often found deep in the tissue, so deep towards the musculoskeletal junction of the deep muscles around the spine, as an example. Your myasina corpuscles, so those ones are responsible for sensitivity to light touch, and those are often found on the non-hairy skin. And then your interstitial receptors, so those ones are your free nerve endings. And there's about 80% of the peripheral nerves are the free nerve endings. And they surround all the follicles, they're inside the bones and everywhere in between. So they're very abundant in the body. And 90% of those interstitial receptors are actually your interoceptors. But the ones we're going to discuss within kinesiology taping and what we're going to discuss shortly are the Ruffini receptors. And those receptors are the ones that respond to sustained shear and pressure. The Ruffini receptors are found within the ligaments of the peripheral joints, the dura mater of the brain, the fibrous outer layer of all your joint capsules, the skin and the superficial fascia. So they're very abundant on the peripheral area and the more superficial area of tissues. And what they respond to is that sustained shear and pressure of the skin. So if you're thinking about manual therapy, think about myofascial release and that slow, sustained shearing of the superficial tissues. And they send information about the joints to the brain, so about the peripheral joints, what's happening around that joint. That information is sent back through to the brain. The interesting thing is when these receptors are stimulated, it can help reduce muscle tone, which is where, if you've learnt a technique such as post-isometric relaxation, some MET, some muscle energy techniques, and even PNF, then you will have stimulated these raphinia receptors if you've done any of those techniques. So what happens, well, what we think happens when we apply kinesiology tape to the skin is that these raphinia receptors will respond continuously to that slight lateral skin stretch when the tape is applied. So that recoil effect, that little gentle lateral skin stretch, that's what stimulates those raphinia receptors. So the whole time that tape is applied, these raphinia receptors will be sending messages, relaying information to the brain that the tape is there. And what this might help with is pain reduction, which we'll discuss later, coordination, but also it's a new stimuli, so it's something different. So the brain is aware of what's happening. If you've got an area that you can't create those movement pathways, if there is some changes and there's some neurotags from the brain to that area, this may help with that. So to shortly recap on session 1, so many early claims of kinesiology taping were untrue, which created all that controversy around the kinesio taping modality. Tape on its own will not make a huge difference, but when it's a part of a whole treatment plan, can be very effective for your patients. And then we discussed the different mechanoreceptors within the body and how they respond to kinesiology taping, and the raphinia receptors are responsible for sending that information to the body because they detect different shearing and stretching within the skin. And what tape does when it's applied, it activates and stimulates that stretch, stimulating those raphinia receptors. And if you're going to jump straight into session 2, let's go into that one now.